Welcome to another video from explainingcomputers.com. This time I'm going to talk about high and rising prices for RAM and storage. Specifically, I'm going to detail where we are now, how and why we got here, the outlook for 2026 and the wider implications. So let's go and get started. Today, most computing devices are equipped with DRAM, or dynamic random access memory, which comes in several different types, including the DDR4 and DDR5 modules used in desktop PCs, many laptops and many servers, as well as LPDDR4 and LPDDR5 RAM chips. Here, LP stands for low power, with this type of DRAM being soldered to the motherboard in most smartphones, thin laptops and other mobile devices. And LPDDR5 chips are also used in SOCAMs, or small outline compression attached memory modules, which are a new kind of AI-centric server memory. In addition, we have GDDR5, GDDR6 and GDDR7 RAM chips which are used in graphics cards, as well as HBM, or high bandwidth memory, which is increasingly used in AI and other high-performance computing servers. In 2025, the price of all types of DRAM rose significantly. Indeed, in early 2026, the price for many types of RAM is 2 to 3 times higher than it was a year ago. Several factors have driven these price increases and are expected to make prices rise even further in 2026. Most significantly, in 2025, the demand for RAM for AI data centers massively increased, whilst also in 2025, DDR4 RAM began to reach end of life. In addition, in December 2025, Micron announced the closure of its crucial consumer brand. And finally, market responses to all of these events created further supply pressures. So let's now look at each of these developments in more depth. Without doubt, the biggest reason for RAM price increases is the rise in demand for memory for AI data centers. Here, the main requirement is for high bandwidth memory, which is manufactured by stacking layers of DRAM vertically. However, all DRAM is made using the same 300mm silicon wafers, and these are hard to manufacture and in limited supply. So, all wafers diverted to HBM production reduce the number available to make other types of DRAM. What's more, HBM production consumes about 3 times more wafer capacity per gigabyte than DDR5, so placing even more pressure on wafer supply. As a result, the AI revolution has reduced both the supply of materials used to make end-user memory as well as the production capacity dedicated to it. And inevitably, this has driven up prices. Turning to the end of life for DDR4, by mid-2025, the 3 major suppliers of DRAM, Micron, Samsung and SK Hynix, had all announced that DDR4 production would cease by the end of the year. All 3 companies were keen to close older, less profitable manufacturing lines. And so, across 2025, the supply of DDR4 and LPDDR4 transitioned from abundant to constrained, so increasing prices. This said, by December 2025, Samsung and SK Hynix had reversed their decision, indicating that some DDR4 production would continue into 2026. However, this extension is a limited one to serve industrial customers, and has only occurred because DDR4 prices are now so high and indeed sometimes greater than DDR5. Micron's decision to exit the consumer marketplace is also highly significant. Given that Micron is one of the 3 big DRAM suppliers, this removal of a key player will reduce the supply and so increase the price of DRAM products used in many end-user systems. In its press release, Micron indicated that the shipment of crucial RAM modules and SSDs will continue until the end of February 2026. But after this time, the company will focus solely on industrial customers. Or, as its chief business officer explained, the AI-driven growth in the data center has led to a surge in demand for memory and storage. Micron has made the difficult decision to exit the crucial consumer business in order to improve supply and support for our larger strategic customers in faster-growing segments. In any market, when supply shocks occur and prices increase, buyers react. The panic buying and hoarding of RAM has therefore started to occur, with individual system builders keen to get hold of memory when they can still afford it, whilst manufacturers have sought to increase inventory levels. This is particularly the case in the industrial computing sector, where DDR4 modules will be required to maintain legacy systems for many years. Alongside RAM, SSD prices are also rising. This is principally due to the storage demands of new AI data centers, with manufacturers again diverting production capacity to the corporate market. In addition, the majority of the NAND flash memory chips used in SSDs are manufactured by the same companies who make most of the world's DRAM. This matters because Samsung, SK Hynix and Micron can, to some extent, replace NAND flash production with DRAM production. And indeed, it's already been reported that they're doing just this, which will inevitably reduce NAND flash availability and push up SSD prices. As reported by TrendForce News, 2026 could become a dry year, with significant NAND flash shortages. In November 2025, Phison confirmed that NAND flash prices had more than doubled in 6 months, whilst in December 2025, Kingston revealed that it had faced a 246% increase in NAND flash wafer prices since the start of the year, with 70% of this occurring in the last 60 days. Finally, turning to hard drives, these are also being ordered in large quantities for AI data centers. Here, they are used to store cold or warm data that's infrequently accessed, and where their cost per gigabyte gives them the edge over the SSDs and DRAM used for hot storage. More generally, the demand for hard drives is likely to increase as SSDs become more expensive and are in shorter supply. In China, government policy changes driving local PC production have also boosted hard drive demand. And as a result of all these factors, hard drive prices increased by about 4% in the last quarter of 2025. In the face of high demand, Samsung, SK Hynix and Micron are investing in new manufacturing plant, with 6 of their major projects listed here. However, as we can see, most of their new facilities will not enter production until 2027 or 2028. Having looked at many different forecasts, I therefore predict that in 2026, DDR5 prices will rise significantly for at least the first half of the year, maybe going up by another 50% or more. Indeed, in December, Samsung reportedly doubled the contract price for DDR5 to RAM manufacturers, and this will soon reflect in the price of final modules. In addition, DDR4 prices will also continue to rise, as modules using Samsung, SK Hynix and Micron chips reach end of life in the consumer market. Turning to storage, SSD prices are very likely to increase significantly across the first half of the year, again quite possibly by 50% or more. The higher prices for NAND flash mentioned in the last part of the video are again now filtering through into final products, and by the second quarter we may have significant SSD shortages in the retail market. Finally, hard drive prices will also continue to rise, but to a lesser extent than those for RAM and SSDs. So here we're probably talking single rather than double-digit percentage price increases per quarter. Due to what I've discussed so far, fewer and less extensive PC builds and upgrades are likely to take place in 2026. If new hardware is essential, then purchasing RAM and SSDs sooner rather than later is clearly advised if at all possible. The price of graphics cards will also inevitably increase as RAM gets more expensive. So I imagine that 2026 will be a depressed year for the self-build market, and hence a difficult one for those selling motherboards, CPUs, and other components. Elsewhere in the market, PC manufacturers are expected to reduce the amount of RAM and storage in their budget systems. For example, in 2026, entry-level PCs and laptops will be far more likely to have 8 rather than 16 GB of RAM and maybe 256 or 512 GB of storage, with 1 TB increasingly rare. Even in more expensive systems, RAM and storage capacities are unlikely to increase as they typically have in the past. The days when you got a higher computer specification for the same price you paid a few years earlier may be over for some time. Shortages and price increases are also having wider implications. Not least, some companies are reported to have fired executives who failed to secure the memory required for their AI ambitions. Talking of which, everything discussed in this video is likely to accelerate the concentration of computer power in cloud data centers. Without doubt, the purchasing activities of those building massive AI factories are making it more expensive and hence more difficult for those who want to run local large AI models. And by the end of 2026, the average end-user device is likely to have less RAM and less storage than it would have had without the AI bubble. Right now, in the computing marketplace, capitalism is working as intended. Component demand is exceeding supply, and hence prices are rising and money talks. Clearly, for PC builders, this situation is not good, but makers have always risen to a challenge. And with the end of support for Windows 10, we have a glut of old hardware just waiting to be given new life. One positive outcome of the current situation may therefore be a lot fewer older computers and components ending up in landfill. But now that's it for another video. If you've enjoyed what you've seen here, please press that like button. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. And I hope to talk to you again very soon.